So my name is Carolyn Foote, and I'm the district and librarian for Eames ISD, and I'm also one of two high school librarians. So I wear two hats, and tonight two antennas for Halloween.
Yes.
I'm lucky enough to get to work with colleagues around the country, like Joyce, who is so amazing. And I have done a lot of work with social media, with library space design, with using technology in libraries, and those are some of my areas of expertise, I guess you would say. And occasionally I write for some magazines.
Yes, and you've also been involved with organizing the Computers in Libraries Conference. You've spoken at South by Southwest EDU. You've been to the White House. You've been involved in Future Ready initiatives. Yeah, you've done a lot of stuff, and you've been up for a bunch of awards. And you have a blog.
I do have a blog.
And we met, I think, in San Antonio a long time ago.
That's right. That's right.
Right. And when the first bloggers cafes at ISTE.
Yeah. Yeah, it was so exciting in the early days to meet people that you just knew from Twitter or from blogging. And I did start my blog quite a few years ago with Internet Librarian, probably 10 or 11 years ago. So it's been a little quiet of late, but I still blog.
So one of the things on our playlist, Carolyn, is your recent Future Ready webinar with Andy Plemons on school library design and on design thinking and on thinking about the needs of your community and your culture. And also, one of the things I was really impressed with was deciding on what message you're sending by how you're thinking about design. So this week in our 575 class, we're talking about all of these things. And I know you've redesigned libraries, and I know you've been doing these workshops. What are the important things for school librarians to think about as they address issues relating to space?
So I think one thing I want to start off with is that too often when we start thinking about renovating or reinvigorating spaces, we start with the furniture because that's easy. We see it, we like it, we have a response to it. But really where I'd like people to start is by considering what your mission is, what the school's mission is, what you hope to accomplish with the space that you're recreating, what your goals are, what student learning you want to see in the space, so that after you've done all that thinking, the decisions you make will be the correct ones for your space. And once you have that sort of defined, hang on one second.
That's okay.
Mr. I'm recording. Anyway, it's really important to have that focus before you start designing anything. And I actually just sat down with one of our librarians whose PTO wants to give her $10,000 to redo some things in her library. And she was being asked for what vendors to use. And so she contacted me. So we met together with the parents and we spent about an hour talking about what her goals were for her library, what were her future ready goals, what kind of learning she wanted to see happening. And then we talked about what kind of furniture would reflect that. So now they have a much better concept, I hope, of where they want to go and what they can accomplish, and they can prioritize, because it's hard when you're facing all this cool furniture and all these things and all these spaces you see and you want to recreate all of them. So you need to have a way to prioritize what you want to do as well, because you don't always have the capability to do everything. So that's one of my main recommendations I make to people that's simple to convey.
One of the other things that you said has always made me think was that we have to look outside of the library world to understand how spaces are evolving. Could you speak to that? I know you read books on design that have nothing to do with libraries, and you visit spaces that provide some inspiration for you.
Yeah, I think that looking out in the community is a really important benefit to design, and thinking about trends that are going on in industry and business and restaurants, and seeing how the collision of ideas really can help you get more creative. Um, and so when we redesigned our library, I took inspiration from lighting at restaurants and ceilings at another restaurant and chalkboards somewhere else, and sort of brought those ideas into our space, because a lot of times, especially restaurants, are very transactional with the customers, in the way that we want to be as librarians. They create an environment, or a coffee shop, when you walk in the space, it creates an environment that you want to be in. And every coffee shop is different. And there's some that you go in and you want to stay, and there's some that you go in once and you'll probably never go back. And so, what is that intangible that makes one space work and one space doesn't? So, you can get a lot of individual ideas from looking at outside spaces, but you can also get sort of an idea of how to create something cohesive, where the space has a message it's communicating to whoever's coming into the space, like the students. Um, and I think that too long, school libraries all looked pretty much alike, but our communities aren't all alike. And so figuring out, how can your space better reflect your local community? The best way to figure that out is by being in spaces that people love to be in your local community. So so that's why I try to look at lots of spaces and get ideas from lots of spaces. And I also think, of course, they're the professionals. So, commercial spaces have professional designers, and often we don't. And so it gives me some ideas on how to bring some innovation into our space. And then the other thing I think is important, that's tangential to that, is bringing the community into when you're trying to design the space. Um, it is so rare that students are asked questions about how they would like their library to look, and what's important about the library to them, and what are the obstacles in the current library to them using it well, and how do they like to learn, and what kind of spaces do they like to learn in. We just don't ask them those questions. And when architects come in and build new schools, students inputs are, I mean, often librarians aren't even consulted about libraries, but I think it's just so important to have their voices involved. And there's lots of different ways to do that, and I have some creative ways I can share later if we want to talk about that. But I just think having a lot of outside input really helps create a better end product.
Yeah, so I keep thinking about the way everything keeps shifting, and I had these opportunities to build libraries 4 times in my careers, and
Mm.
work with architects, and tried to keep ahead of like what was happening next. And the last time, we involved the students in the design, but we had no idea the shift was going to happen, where people wouldn't be using desktop computers, and that we'd be like plopping all over the place with mobile devices and iPads and laptops and whatever, and that the physical space that we built in terms of lab environment just wouldn't be necessary. I wonder how you keep ahead of that curve when you're doing a major redesign. And so it's not just something that you can actually visualize, because I don't think we could have visualized this in the year 1999 when I last did the design. How do you plan for a continual shift?
That is really difficult. And I remember someone that a parent that I was working with on our iPad pilot several years ago called it future forward or future friendly, and really trying to consciously think what might be coming down the road. But one of the things he talked a lot about is flexibility. And really, the more you design spaces that are flexible, the more they'll be able to adapt. We tried to put some sliding glass walls in our library, so there's some areas you know, conceivably, if we didn't need them to be separated, we could just have the wall permanently open. But if we wanted separate rooms, we could close them. And I really had to struggle with our maintenance department to get that to happen in the architectural plans. And they bargained all the way up to the superintendent. So we got 2 sliding walls and not the other one. And now I wish we had the other one because it's in the room that gets used the most. But our library, the same thing. The flexible rolling furniture came out right after we opened. And so, we thought about things being portable. So we have things that stack and are light, some furniture that's lightweight, but we didn't have, that wasn't really on the radar other than some shelving being mobile. So, I think the thing that's important is to read the trends. The site I use the most right now is the Center for the Future of Libraries.
Our friend Miguel.
And yes, he has a great trend spotting site, so you can click on all these different trends and read summaries of them. And then he has a newsletter that comes out every week or every other week. And it's great because he tracks industry trends, business trends, government trends, just all sorts of things. Like fast casual restaurants, how will that impact service in a library? And how will that affect how we should design something? Or, the way my son's 28, he's really into ordering these boxes where they send you a sampler of snacks or a sampler of something, and you can get a sampler every month. And how will something like that affect what our kids expect us to be able to provide if we want to seem real and not like artificial and schooly? So
You said something in the last, was it you or your student who said something? I wanted a space that didn't smell like school. Was that you?
Oh yeah. It was from a Paul Bogush is his name, or Bogush. I don't know if you know him. I met him at
I don't know him. I know his
I
name.
met him at a the Department of Ed meeting, and he designed on the 3rd floor of his school. There was a classroom that wasn't being used, so he decided to turn it into a music studio. There's a trick-or-treater here. Sorry. He decided to turn it into a music studio and call it a place that doesn't smell like school. And so he made a whole website, and that was the name of the website, a place that doesn't smell like school, which I love because he was trying to just create an authentic place kids could go and play the guitar and hang out. And I really think about that a lot in our library. Like instead of sticking posters on the wall with tape, I bought frames, so everything's in a frame, because in a house, in a coffee shop, in any public space, things are going to be in a frame. And that sounds, like a minuscule thing, but it's conveying that we aren't just a schooly, like nerdy institution, that we're creating a student-friendly space that's more like the real world. And so that's where I got some of those ideas from, people like him.
I love it. I love, one of the things we don't really talk about, one of the things you mentioned is lighting. I mean, just these little things that are really important that make you either love or not love a space.
Yeah.
Acoustics, like these
Mhm.
are really important things. Do you want to enter it? Do you go when you walk into the space and feel like you just want to plop down and relax, or settle down and work? And these things are aesthetic, and they're difficult to put your finger on. One
Yeah,
thing,
they definitely.
and I've told you about this. I sent my seniors around with cameras 2 or 3 years in a row, and I had them record their feelings about the various different spaces in the library. And the data that we collected from that was really astounding, and it flew in the face of some of what folks were saying. And one of the things they were first of all, we discovered students use the space in various different ways depending upon their interests, their personalities, their needs, and they were different even if they were in the same AP history class. Um, but what I discovered was that while I was all ready to read Annals of America, the third set of that I had on the circulating shelves, what I discovered was that there were groups of students who gathered on the floor by those books and were just dividing the books up for DBQs. And we had it online. They could have easily, they wanted the culture of sitting together and playing with those books. And they gushed about it. And so I would have weeded those, and maybe nobody would have really noticed, but there was this kind of gathering place. There was a kid who had an office in the back of the library that I never really thought about as his office, but he said, "It's my office. I do tutoring there." And I went, "Okay, Kyle." I didn't know that, but people they nest, and they find these separate little spaces that maybe you didn't even design as these separate little spaces.
Right. Right. It's very interesting what you learn when you talk to kids. I know our middle school librarian interviewed students about how they learned and if they liked, their library to be loud or quiet. And she did videos of all of them. And it's hysterical because one student will say, "Oh, I love to work in a study, Carol, where no one else can bother me and I can't see anybody." And then the next student is laying upside down on the chair, during the interview going, "I love it to be loud. I like lots of my friends around and music playing and and being able to show a principal or the PTO, like, kids aren't all the same and we need to have spaces that are adaptive to that, where we can have quiet spaces and we can have gathering, we can have individual spaces. But having that student feedback is so important, and helping them feel like a part of it, like their voice matters in the space. And we actually last year we have a ninth grade library kind of annexed to our library, and we kind of folded the two spaces together. And so we asked our interior design class to come in, and I brought in vendors
Design
and
class.
yes, and we brought in vendors and fabrics and carpet samples, and then they had to do a presentation on how they would redesign the space. And it was so great. And PTO gave us some money to do some pieces in the space. And when the kids came in the next year, whose ideas were adopted, they were just like over the moon, like because they had had a real contribution. And a couple times when we were kind of torn between this kind of furniture, that I would call them in and say, which colors or which do you think? And I would go with the suggestion they gave me. And because I really wanted it to be liked by students.
Yeah.
So it's great when you can have that input. And that's something I feel like, I mean, I've been at our school 26 years. I feel like we've always been very student friendly, but I think I haven't come around to this idea of really seriously recruiting and incorporating student voice into like design until the last, 8 or 10 years. And So I missed a lot of opportunities, but I'm doing it now.
I don't think you should beat yourself up over this, Carolyn. No, I think you're inspiring us all to listen more closely. And I know Amy's here. She's their only student tonight. But Amy, or I know you've been thinking a bit. Do you have any questions of Carolyn?
Yeah, so just kind of what we were just talking about, like a couple things. One, like, were you ever really surprised by how the students kind of envisioned the space, and like that they took it in a totally different direction than you would have? And then sort of as a follow-up, like, how often would you consider redesigning a library? Or, because obviously kids, I mean, if you said you're following the trends, like those trends change rapidly too. So,
Right. Well, it's funny too. My ideas of that have changed so much, and maybe it's just because what we're doing has changed. Profession has changed. But I used to design a library and imagine we have trick-or-treaters. And imagine that it would last for like 40 years.
Yeah.
You wouldn't rearrange it. You didn't move the shelves very often. And the idea was it to be durable as possible and last all this time. And so when we opened, we were gutted 9 years ago, and to the rafters that raised the roof. I mean, it was a complete rebuild. And I thought, well, that's it. Okay, we've got our space now. And within 2 years, we were like, well, we need to readapt this space to do this, or we need to, move this over here, or we need to completely revamp this area and get completely different furniture. And so I wasn't expecting that. So I think that the pace of change has just changed, and we have to be willing to look at our spaces as more like in beta mode all the time. And the other part of your question about the students, when we were doing the 9th grade space, one of the students, our 9th grade library has a low part of the ceiling, and then a huge high ceiling in most of the space, and there's these pillars that hold the ceiling up. And the student said, do these pillars have to be this fat? Like, is there something inside the pillars? And so they had torn out a piece of the desk that was attached to one of the pillars. So I was like, well, actually, I could see inside where they tore this piece out before they fixed it. No, there's just a little hole in there. There's really no reason this pillar has to be this wide. I never would have asked that question. Like it just wouldn't have occurred to me because the pillar was there. And the fact that she saw inside the pillar in her mind and saw, well, this is a barrier to the space, I just never would have occurred to me at all. So there were things like that were, especially with the interior design students, because maybe they were being more reflective about design, in the class, but it just surprised me completely. So, and I'm sure, I know there were other examples. That just is the one that sticks out in my mind. So I think that that's part of the value of having fresh eyes. You use a space very differently as an employee of it than as a customer of it. And a lot of times we're very focused in library design on what works for the employee, and what we need behind the desk, and how many drawers we need, and convenience to the book drop, and all that stuff. And we're a little less focused on all the tiny little details that make the student space better. So that's why I think the input's so important. Great question.
One of the things that that led me to with the column or the pillar is the notion of like questioning things. And so I would have assumed that a pillar is a load-bearing kind of thing, and it would have to be there. Similarly, I would assume that every library needed a circulation desk, and every library needed an office. And so I wonder if there really are some sacred cows that we're questioning right now in terms of what libraries should look like, and do we need all those things we used to think we needed?
Right. right. We did a few. It was kind of funny when we were designing our front desk. Ours is bigger than some because we have multiple staff that sit there, but I really wanted it to look like more like a business office or a metal desk with like magnets could be stuck on it, the front of it, and that it was curvy and fun. And the architects kept bringing me drawings over and over of a giant, normal looking, old fashioned circulation desk. And the whole rest of the space, like we were very simpatico on everything. And I was like, no, 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 this is what I want. And so we had a meeting at their office, and their office is in an old warehouse downtown Austin, and that they redid as offices. And I walked in the front door, and their reception desk was exactly what I wanted. And they had it right in front of their noses the whole time, and like they couldn't make that jump either. So it was kind of funny how that they have limits in how they see libraries too. And I think that's why having library voices is important partnership too with architects.
I also think that you don't always have the opportunity to work with an architect on a project. And so one of the things I noticed was that I could leverage the staff of the district. I was never, well, I was never really in a huge district, but we always had carpenters who worked for the district. And so when I wanted to put the furniture on casters and chop legs so that the inch or two that I gained with a caster would be like okay, I discovered that the workmen the work people who were in that department were really happy to skip the snow removal and prefer to work in the library. And as long as I fed them and encouraged them to play their music in the library, this is really where they wanted to be. And so they would if I had a project and did a work order, they'd be on it much more quickly than they'd be on many other major projects. And so I was able to get all my furniture repurposed by our own custodial or carpentry staff. But people see that.
And we discovered that too. I had seen the rolling whiteboards and the dividers, and they were really expensive. And that was after we'd already been built. And I wanted a way to interact with the kids when I wasn't interacting with them, like when I wasn't there. And so I had this idea for these really narrow, like whiteboards that we could leave a marker out, and I could put a question up, or kids could, or whatever. And so our library is all transparent. We have a lot of glass. That was sort of our theme. And so I asked the maintenance department, I showed them some pictures and asked could they build one but make it out of plexiglass or black plexiglass so that it's sort of transparent. And so they built several of them, and we use them all over the library. And they're unique to our space, and they were so excited to work on it. So then I told the other librarians, and they built story steps in one of our libraries. So they've done different projects for different librarians, and I think that's been a good project. I mean, a good way. And also they're proud of what they did, and they felt like they were helping us out. We also, a few weeks ago, my husband and I, it's just reminding me, we were at the mall, and I went in Williams-Sonoma, and they had a sign out front that they were selling their some display furniture. So we went inside, and they were selling these tables and this, slat wall, basically a rolling display with slat wall all over it for $25. So I bought all of it on the spot, not knowing how I was going to get it to school, and asked our maintenance department, speaking of maintenance, if they would go pick it up at Williams-Sonoma for me and roll it into the school, and they were happy to do it. So so a lot of times, there's internal people that are willing to do stuff. A lot of being a librarian is about relationships. I had relationships with our architects, which have led to many other projects since then, relationships with our head of maintenance for the district, which meant, they would call me on the QT if something was going down that they thought I should know about. So I think.
So I just want to say that includes the kind of scouting that would happen. Somebody's getting rid of something and they know you want it.
Right.
And if you have to let them know to let you know, because they will find this stuff for you.
Right. And I think sometimes, I'm at a big school. We have 2,600 kids, but by knowing the district head of maintenance and the campus head of maintenance and the carpenters, and they'll fix my air conditioning before anybody else is in the building, because we always say thank you, and we have a relationship. And I just think so many things get done if you have relationships with people. And even if you're an introvert or shy, because sometimes librarians are, I think that just recognizing people that are in unrecognized roles, a lot of times we can help one another.
Absolutely. I want to respect your time. I know we're only going to do a half an hour. So, Amy, do you have any other questions of Carolyn before we close up?
I did just have a quick question, because obviously I'm a student, so I'm going to hopefully get a job in the next couple years. How would you recommend, like, when you start at a new place, and then do you recommend like waiting a couple of years, or just trying to like leave things the same, or is it good to kind of get in and change something so that people know, hey, I'm a new person, this is going to be different, or a little bit of both?
It's a great question.
It is a great question. So, my general recommendation would be a little bit of both, because you want to be able to put your stamp on things right from the beginning, but you also don't know what's there for different reasons. However, my caveat to that is, if a principal hires you and says, I want you to remake the library, no one's coming in here, I want you to go after it, and that's sort of the direction when you're hired, then by all means go after it. But even then, I think it's so important to kind of pool opinions from teachers, pull together a miniature committee of people, get to know who the key players are in terms of faculty, so that you have people, in your corner, and you're drawing on the leaders on campus right away, or student council, students, and because you can never over communicate anything you do. And so I think having those connections makes a difference. Now, if it's a different situation where you're coming in and the principal has not brought you in as a change agent, you just see that things need to be changed, that's where I think you have to be really intentional and proceed a little more slowly and get a feel for the climate of the school, and how receptive are people going to be to drastic changes, if those are what you see needs to be made, and starting right away, trying to figure out again who those teacher players are, who would be most influential with other teachers. And but you also need to know, like Joyce was talking about, those third copy of books that kids are seeing in the back corner. If you don't spend some time observing how things work, you miss all those little finite details that are maybe important to the culture of that library or the traditions of that space. And so, so I think doing some observation is really important. And I also think just being positive and respectful of the person who was there before you, because you don't know who they had good or bad relationships with. And, it's easy to go and say, oh my God, they hadn't weeded for 30 years. But, maybe everybody loved that librarian and they were a real people person. And, so right off the bat, you've insulted someone who was really respected in the school. So, and I think that's easy. People are always going to have mixed feelings about the person who left. Some will like them and some will think it could have been different, and some will be indifferent completely. So, So I think that that's also just important to be respectful, and if you make a lot of changes, even finding ways to hang on to traditions. The new Austin Public Library just opened, and it's an amazing an amazing new library. If you ever come to Austin, you should come see it. It's on the river. They have decks, a rooftop patio. It's beautiful. But they brought 3 tables from the old Central Library that was built in the 30s, and they refinished the wood tables, and they're on one of the floors, just to keep a little bit of the tradition that was there. I think that's a nice touch to be able to keep some nod to that, especially if it's an older campus or where there is a lot of tradition. Trying to find a way to blend that in is always a good idea. But it's exciting to get the opportunity to, start fresh with a new librarian. And most schools really embrace, I think, the changes that people are making. You just have to know what the sacred cows are.
Yeah. So there are wonderful examples, and so this week we're going to be pinning some of our, like, a design board of things, things we love. And I think I really related to the whole notion of, like, there are some things you may not even know don't need to be changed. And so I remember walking into a library and noticing that there were almanacs that went way far back, like 20 years. And I was going to say, like, why would you need any almanac other than this year's almanac? Well, there was a historical data project that I was unaware of and only came around in the spring. Had I weeded in October, I would not have known that these almanacs are spread out over tables and used in a really collaborative, interesting way on a data project. But those things you make snap judgments on, and you really don't know. And so my rule of thumb is to, like, be in a place for a year before I do any major real redesigns. But there are certainly exceptions to that. In any case, Carolyn, how would my students reach you if they wanted to continue a communication?
So I would love to hear from any of them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's nice to have met you tonight. And my Twitter account is one way, and that's at Techno Library. But I'm also on Instagram as Techno Library. I'm on, my email is technolibrary@gmail.com. So you can find me most places under Techno Library, and you can post on my blog. I have a Pinterest page under Techno Library with actually several on library design, so you may run across some of that.
That'd be great.
But I love hearing from people, and I love sharing if people have a question. So
we're all very grateful for your time, and I'm hoping that a number of my students will not only say thank you, but continue communicating with you.
Well, I look
So
forward
I'm
to
going to
it.
stop the recording, and will I see you at AASL?
You will. I'm going to be there all week. I'm coming on Monday because of Liliad, so I'll be there the whole week.
I may rope you into some things at Unconf if you can.
Oh, yeah.
Let me stop the recording and I'll tell you.